Have you ever wondered which ancient kingdom gave birth to the very first coins in human history? A land so wealthy that even rivers sparkled with gold, and a king whose name still echoes today whenever we speak of unimaginable riches. This is the story of Lydia, the forgotten kingdom that shaped the way our world understands money, power, and wealth. In this series, we will travel back to the valleys of Anatolia, uncover the rise of Sardis, meet legendary rulers like King Croesus, and discover how a single invention changed the course of human civilization forever. So, before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this journey through history, because the past holds secrets that continue to shape our present, and Lydia Eos's story is one you want to miss. Long before the words wealth and gold became symbols of power, there was a land in western Anatolia that glimmered with promise. Nestled between mountains and rivers, Lydia stood as a fertile crossroads where east and west brushed shoulders. Today, the name of this kingdom might not be spoken as often as Egypt, Greece, or Rome, yet the seeds of modern civilization were quietly planted here. To understand Lydia is to understand how the human imagination shaped money, power, and identity. The land of rivers and hills. The story of Lydia begins with geography. Imagine a valley framed by rolling hills, where the mighty Hermus River, today called the Sardis, carved its path through the heart of the land. To the south stretched Mount Tmolus, crowned with forests and rich with minerals. From this mountain flowed the Pactolus River, a seemingly ordinary stream until one looked closer. Its sands sparkled with specks of electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. Legend would one day claim that King Midas himself washed away his cursed golden touch in this river, leaving behind its eternal glitter. Geography gave Lydia its gift. Unlike other lands where resources were scarce, Lydia was blessed with both fertile soil for agriculture and mineral wealth that would astonish generations. The valleys yielded grain, vineyards thrived on the slopes, and the rivers became both lifelines and symbols of prosperity. This abundance allowed Lydia not merely to survive, but to dream beyond survival. A people between worlds. The origins of the Lydian people stretch into the haze of the 2nd millennium BCE. Ancient texts suggest they emerged from Indo-European migrations, though their identity was uniquely their own. To the west lay the Greek-speaking Ionians on the Aegean coast. To the east, the powerful empires of the Near East, Hittites, Phrygians, Assyrians. Lydia was the bridge between these worlds, a land both influenced by and resistant to its neighbors. The capital, Sardis, rose as a beacon of Lydian life. Built upon a high plateau with commanding views of the valley below, Sardis was not only a fortress but also a cultural heart. Its streets bustled with traders bringing goods from the coast and merchants traveling from inland Anatolia. From the very beginning, Lydia was shaped by exchange of goods, ideas, and traditions. Though many details of their earliest kings remain hidden in myth, the Lydians spoke a language distinct from Greek, yet their culture often intermingled with it. They worshipped gods who echoed those of their neighbors, Cybele, the mother goddess, and a storm god reminiscent of Zeus. Over time, they would absorb and reshape foreign influences, creating something unmistakably Lydian. Myths that shaped identity. Every people tells stories to explain who they are, and Lydia was no exception. One legend tells of their ancestor Lydis, the son of King Attis, from whom the kingdom took its name. Another tale places the Lydians within the great migrations that followed the Trojan War, suggesting they were cousins to the Etruscans who later thrived in Italy. Whether fact or fable, these stories gave the Lydians a sense of belonging to the grand narrative of the ancient Mediterranean. Perhaps the most enduring myth connected to Lydia was that of King Midas and the Pactolus River. According to the tale, When the Phrygian king Midas begged the gods to remove his curse of turning everything he touched into gold, he was told to wash himself in the Pactolus. From that day, the river carried gold dust in its sands, enriching Lydia beyond measure. Though mythic, the story reflected a truth. Lydia's identity was inseparable from its golden rivers. The seeds of a kingdom. By the early 1st millennium BCE, Lydia had grown into a recognizable kingdom. Its rulers, known as the Heraclid dynasty, claimed descent from the hero Heracles. For generations they maintained power in Sardis, though their reign was often shadowed by rival powers nearby. Yet it was not until the rise of the Mermnad dynasty in the 7th century BCE that Lydia began to emerge as a serious force. The first of this new line, King Gyges, seized the throne around 680 BCE. His story is one of ambition and transformation. Ancient writers, including Herodotus, tell us that Gyges rose from the ranks of a royal bodyguard to become king, aided by court intrigue and prophecy. Whether embellished or true, Gyges' reign marked a turning point. Lydia stepped onto the stage of regional power. Sardis grew in splendor, trade flourished, and Lydia began its journey toward becoming the wealthiest kingdom of its time. Culture of exchange. In its earliest days, Lydia was a melting pot. Farmers tended the fields and vineyards, while craftsmen worked metals, textiles, and pottery. Lydia's horses were prized throughout the region, and the kingdom's textiles were renowned for their richness and quality. The fertile soil supported not only the people but also a culture of artistry and trade. Unlike societies consumed by endless warfare, Lydia invested much of its energy into cultivating prosperity. Music and poetry also held an important place. The Greek poet Sappho once described the luxurious robes from Sardis, hinting at the cultural reach of Lydian artisans. Even in the realm of myth, Sardis was remembered as a place of elegance and refinement, a city where art and wealth intertwined. The whisper of gold. It is impossible to speak of Lydia without returning again to its rivers. The Pactolus glittered with electrum, and this shimmering resource set Lydia apart. Where other kingdoms struggled with barter or with unwieldy measures of metal, Lydia possessed a natural supply of a metal perfectly suited for transformation. Though the world had not yet conceived of money in the modern sense, the conditions for its birth were ripening in Lydia's golden sands. At first, Lydians likely weighed electrum in small ingots for trade, but soon a revolutionary idea would emerge: to stamp and guarantee pieces of precious metal as tokens of value. This idea, simple yet world-changing, was still centuries away in the early history of Lydia. But the ingredients were already present. The wealth of the land was not only visible in its rivers but also in the imagination of its people. A kingdom awaits its destiny. The beginning of Lydia's story is not one of immediate glory, but of foundations being laid. Geography, myth, culture, and wealth were aligning to shape a kingdom unlike any other. As the first kings of the Mermnad dynasty secured their rule, they inherited more than a throne. They inherited a land that was destined to change the world. From Sardis, one could stand on the citadel and gaze upon the Hermus Valley, watching the rivers shimmer in the sunlight. Below, merchants haggled in markets, farmers led oxen through fields, and miners sifted through sands for flecks of gold. None of them could know that their kingdom would one day introduce the world to the very concept of money. Yet the promise was already there, waiting to unfold. The story of Lydia begins with rivers that glittered, myths that inspired, and a people who lived between worlds. This was the soil from which greatness would grow. And as we turn the page to Lydia's classical age, we begin to see how this kingdom transformed its gifts into influence, how it became not just a land of wealth, but a power that the ancient world could not ignore. The story of Lydia's rise is a tale of transformation. In the beginning, The kingdom was shaped by its fertile valleys, golden rivers, and myths that bound its people together. Yet, it was during the classical age of Lydia, roughly between the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, that the kingdom found its true identity. This was the era of Sardis at its height, of kings who dreamed beyond their borders, and of cultural growth that placed Lydia firmly among the great powers of the ancient world. At the center of this age stood Sardis, the Lydian capital. If the rivers were the veins of the kingdom, Sardis was its beating heart. Perched on a steep acropolis overlooking the Hermus Valley, the city was both fortress and marketplace. Its natural defenses made it nearly impregnable, while its location on major trade routes allowed it to flourish. Travelers entering Sardis would have been struck by its contrasts. At the top of the citadel stood royal palaces, their walls gleaming in the sun. Below lay bustling streets filled with merchants, artisans, and farmers bringing their goods to market. Sardis was a city of silk and wool, of precious metals and fine craftsmanship. Even the Greeks, renowned for their own artistry, admired the textiles of Lydia, describing them as luxurious, colorful, and unmatched in quality. The wealth of Sardis was not only seen but also felt. Herodotus, the ancient historian, later described it as one of the richest cities of its time. Its markets were filled with goods from across the Mediterranean and beyond: olive oil and wine from Greece, spices from the East, timber from Anatolia, and, most precious of all, the gold and silver mined from its own rivers and mountains. The classical age was defined by the kings of the Mermnad dynasty, beginning with Gyges around 680 BCE. Gyges came to power under dramatic circumstances, rising from the royal guard to the throne after a palace intrigue. Though his ascent was shadowed by controversy, Gyges established a strong rule and set Lydia on a path of expansion. Under Gyges and his successors, Sardis became not merely a regional capital, but an international hub. Gyges secured Lydia's borders, pushed back hostile neighbors, and opened new channels of trade with the Greek city-states along the coast. He also introduced reforms that strengthened the kingdom's military and administrative systems, allowing Lydia to project power beyond its valley. His son and grandson continued this vision, transforming Lydia from a modest kingdom into a formidable state. By the time of King Alyats II, c. 610 to 560 BCE, Lydia had grown into one of the most influential powers of Western Asia Minor. What made Lydia remarkable was not only its military might, but also its economy. Lydia's golden rivers provided the raw material for its most famous innovation, coinage. But even before coins appeared, trade had already enriched the kingdom. Lydian merchants were adventurous and practical. They traded with Greek Ionians on the coast, with inland Anatolian communities, and with powers further east. Sardis became a melting pot where languages, ideas, and goods mingled freely. Greek pottery and art influenced Lydian tastes, while Lydian textiles and metals became highly sought after in Greek markets. This cultural exchange was more than economic. It shaped Lydia's identity. The Lydians adopted elements of Greek religion and myth, blending them with their own deities. They learned new techniques in art and architecture, but they also influenced their neighbors in return. To the Greeks, Lydia became a land associated with luxury and refinement, a place where wealth seemed endless. As Lydia grew in wealth and power, Sardis itself became a symbol of that prosperity. Its palaces were decorated with splendid treasures, its temples dedicated to the gods of both Lydian and foreign traditions. The city became known not just as a seat of government, but also as a place of pleasure and beauty. The court of Sardis was said to be magnificent. Musicians, poets, and artisans found patronage under Lydian kings. Festivals celebrated both native gods and shared cultural traditions with the Greeks. Sardis was not a city closed in on itself. It was outward-looking, eager to embrace the broader Mediterranean world. For visitors, Sardis must have seemed like a marvel. One could walk through markets filled with colors and scents, hear foreign tongues in the streets, and witness a blending of traditions rarely seen elsewhere. It was here that the identity of Lydia as a wealthy, cosmopolitan kingdom became firmly established. Yet, prosperity alone does not define a kingdom's greatness. Lydia, in the classical age, was also shaped by its politics. The Myrmnad kings were ambitious, seeking to expand Lydia's influence across western Anatolia. They frequently clashed with neighboring peoples, the Cimmerians, Phrygians, and eventually the Greeks themselves. King Alyats II, one of Lydia's greatest rulers, secured Lydia's dominance by defeating the Cimmerians, a nomadic people who had terrorized Anatolia for decades. This victory not only secured Lydia's borders, but also allowed the kingdom to flourish without the constant threat of invasion. Alyattes also fought the Medes of Persia to the east, and though the conflict ended in a stalemate, it demonstrated Lydia's strength as a regional power. Under Alyattes, Sardis grew even more prosperous. He invested in agriculture, encouraging the cultivation of wheat, barley, and vineyards. The wealth of the land fed the people and funded the ambitions of the state. His reign prepared the way for his son, Croesus, who would bring Lydia to its greatest height and also its most fateful moment. During this period, Lydia became synonymous with refinement. Its kings and nobles wore robes of fine fabric, adorned themselves with jewelry, and lived in palaces decorated with luxury. To the Greeks, the Lydians embodied a lifestyle of comfort and elegance. Words like Lydian became shorthand for wealth and opulence in Greek literature. Yet beneath the luxury was a kingdom carefully balancing tradition and innovation. The Lydians never abandoned their roots in the land. Their reliance on agriculture, their devotion to local gods, their respect for myths that tied them to nature and river. But they also embraced change, looking outward to the world and borrowing freely from what they admired. This openness would later allow them to conceive an idea so revolutionary that it would alter the course of history: the invention of coinage. The classical age of Lydia was a time of growth and consolidation. The kingdom expanded its borders, enriched its culture, and built Sardis into a jewel of Anatolia. Under the rule of strong kings like Gyges and Alyattes, Lydia found stability and influence. Its wealth was no longer hidden in rivers and fields. It was displayed in palaces, markets, and festivals. But prosperity carries both promise and peril. Lydia's growing wealth attracted not only admiration, but also envy. Its power placed it in competition with other rising empires. And within its own borders, the challenge of managing such abundance would test its rulers. As we move forward, the story of Lydia begins to open outward. Foreign influences, new ideas, and powerful neighbors will reshape its destiny. For now, Lydia stands as a glittering kingdom in the heart of Anatolia, a land admired, envied, and destined to change the world. Lydia, by the 6th century BCE, had blossomed into a land of wealth and prestige. Its rivers gleamed with electrum, its capital Sardis shimmered with markets, and its kings commanded both respect and fear. Yet no kingdom, however prosperous, exists in isolation. Lydia was shaped not only by its own natural gifts, but also by the world beyond its borders. Trade, religion, diplomacy, and war brought foreign influences that transformed Lydia from a regional power into a civilization that stood at the crossroads of East and West. The closest and most constant influence on Lydia came from its western neighbors, the Greek city-states along the Aegean coast. The Ionians of places like Miletus, Ephesus, and Smyrna were seafarers, thinkers, and merchants whose culture radiated across the eastern Mediterranean. For the Lydians, the Greeks were both partners and rivals. Trade bound them together. Greek merchants flocked to Sardis to purchase textiles, metals, and luxury goods, while Lydians sought Greek pottery, olive oil, and wine. These exchanges went beyond commodities. They carried ideas. Through the Greeks, Lydia encountered new artistic styles, new myths, and even new political concepts. The relationship was not always peaceful. Greek cities valued independence, while Lydian kings often sought to bring them under control. King Alyats II waged campaigns against the Ionians, sometimes devastating their lands. Yet he also allowed Greek culture to flow into his kingdom, blending with Lydian traditions. By the time of his son Croesus, Lydia and the Greeks shared a deep, if uneasy, bond. Adversaries in politics, but partners in culture. While Lydia looked westward to Greece, it could not ignore the great powers to the east. In earlier centuries, the shadow of Assyria stretched across the Near East. Assyria's fierce armies and efficient administration inspired awe and fear, and Lydia was careful not to provoke its distant but formidable power. Though Lydia never fell under Assyrian control, the influence of Assyrian art, military organization, and symbols of kingship reached Anatolia, subtly shaping Lydian practices. By the 7th century BCE, however, Assyria declined, and new powers emerged. The Medes, an Iranian people, established a kingdom in the highlands of Persia. Lydia and Media came into direct conflict, culminating in a famous battle along the Pactolus River, today's Kızılırmak, around 585 BCE. The war was fierce but inconclusive, ending in a remarkable way. During a battle, a solar eclipse darkened the sky. Both armies took it as a sign from the heavens, and peace was declared. This truce marked the Pactolus River as the boundary between Lydia and Media, setting the stage for Lydia's later confrontation with the Persians. The Persians, under Cyrus the Great, were rising in the east. Though at first a distant power, they would soon cast a long shadow over Lydia. Cyrus admired and learned from Lydia's wealth and innovations, but he also desired them. The encounter between Persia and Lydia was not far in the future, and when it came, it would test the very foundations of Croesus's Golden Kingdom. Trade and diplomacy were not the only channels of influence. Religion itself crossed borders, weaving Lydia into a shared tapestry of belief. The Lydians worshipped Cybele, the mother goddess, often depicted enthroned and flanked by lions. Her cult resonated deeply in Anatolia but also spread to Greece, where she was identified with Rhea, mother of the Olympian gods. Temples to Cybele rose not only in Sardis but also in Greek lands, showing how spiritual traditions flowed back and forth across the Aegean. Other deities, too, connected Lydia with its neighbors. The storm god, protector of kings and harvests, bore resemblance to Zeus. Sun and moon deities echoed those of Mesopotamia. In Lydia's pantheon, one could see the fingerprints of many cultures: native Anatolian, Greek, Mesopotamian, and later Persian. This blend reflected Lydia's role as a cultural crossroads, a land open to influences yet determined to maintain its own identity. Perhaps the clearest example of foreign influence reshaping Lydia was the birth of coinage. The Lydians had long traded electrum in weighed pieces, but such trade was inconvenient and open to fraud. The idea of guaranteeing value through stamped metal may have emerged through contact with Greek merchants, who desired a more standardized medium of exchange. The Lydian kings, particularly Alyats, seized this idea and transformed it into reality. The earliest coins, made of electrum, bore the royal stamp, a lion's head, a symbol of power. With this innovation, Lydia not only simplified trade but also proclaimed its authority. Only the king could guarantee value. Coins quickly spread beyond Lydia, carried by Greek traders to their own cities and eventually across the Mediterranean. The Greek word for coin, nomisma, carried the echo of this Lydian invention. What began as a practical solution in Sardis became one of humanity's most influential concepts, shaping economies for millennia. Foreign influence also flowed through diplomacy. The Lydian kings cultivated ties with distant powers, often sending lavish gifts to demonstrate their wealth. Croesus, in particular, became famous for his generosity. Ancient sources tell of his offerings to the Oracle of Delphi, gifts of gold that astonished the Greeks and reinforced Lydia's image as a land of unimaginable riches. Through such gestures, Lydia sought not only alliances but also prestige. In the ancient world, generosity was a form of diplomacy. By giving, one displayed power. Croesus's gifts were remembered for centuries, not only as acts of piety but also as symbols of Lydia's wealth and its desire to be part of a larger Mediterranean and Near Eastern community. Yet influence was a double-edged sword. The same connections that enriched Lydia also exposed it to danger. Trade with Greece brought wealth but also dependence on foreign markets. Conflict with Media established boundaries but also drew Lydia into the geopolitics of powerful empires. Even religion, shared with neighbors, blurred distinctions between Lydians and others, making it harder to assert a purely unique identity. For Lydia's kings, the challenge was to balance openness with strength. They welcomed foreign goods, ideas, and beliefs, but they also sought to assert their own dominance. This balancing act worked for a time, allowing Lydia to thrive. But as the Persians rose in the east, the limits of Lydia's position became clear. To be a crossroads was both a blessing and a vulnerability. By the end of the Classical Age, Lydia stood at the peak of its power. Its kings ruled a wealthy land, its capital gleamed with prosperity, and its influence reached far beyond its borders. Yet it was also clear that Lydia's fate was tied to the wider world. The Greeks admired and envied it, borrowing its ideas even as they resisted its control. The Persians observed it closely, preparing for the day when their ambitions would collide. Religion, art, and trade flowed across Lydia's borders in a ceaseless stream, shaping the kingdom in ways its first kings could never have imagined. In this sense, Lydia was more than just a wealthy land. It was a meeting place of civilizations. The Lydians absorbed foreign influences and made them their own, blending traditions into a culture that was both unique and cosmopolitan. This openness gave birth to Coinage, elevated Sardis, and filled Lydia's treasuries. But it also set the stage for challenges that would test the kingdom's resilience. By the middle of the 6th century BCE, Lydia stood on the threshold of greatness. Its kings had secured the kingdom's borders, its rivers still gleamed with gold, and Sardis, the capital, shone as one of the richest cities in the ancient world. Yet it was in this period, under the rule of King Alyattes and his son Croesus, that Lydia entered its true golden age. This was the era of invention, expansion, and ambition, when Lydia not only basked in its wealth but also transformed it into power and influence. The reign of Alyattes II, c. 610–560 BCE, marked the beginning of Lydia's age of growth. He was both warrior and administrator, securing Lydia's territory through campaigns against the Cimmerians, Medes, and Ionian Greeks, while also fostering the prosperity of his people. Alyattes understood that prosperity came not only from conquest, but from stability. He encouraged agriculture, ensuring that the fertile Hermus Valley produced abundant grain and wine. He also invested in Sardis, strengthening its fortifications and expanding its markets. Merchants traveled from as far as the Levant and the Aegean, drawn by Lydia's reputation for abundance. Alyattes was also remembered for a remarkable tradition. When war damaged the fields of his enemies, he allowed farmers to continue planting crops after battles ended. To him, the wealth of the land was sacred, and even enemies should not starve. Such pragmatism allowed Lydia's economy to remain strong even in times of conflict. Perhaps the most extraordinary innovation of Lydia's age of growth was the invention of coinage. For centuries, trade across the ancient world had been conducted through barter or the weighing of precious metals. Electrum, the natural alloy of gold and silver found in the Pactolus River, was particularly valuable, but it was inconsistent. Its ratio of gold to silver varied, making its worth uncertain. The Lydian kings, seeking a solution, introduced a revolutionary idea: metal pieces of standard weight and purity, stamped with a royal seal to guarantee their value. These were the world's first true coins, created during the reign of Alyattes. The earliest coins bore the image of a lion, symbol of Lydian kingship, pressed into electrum blanks. For the first time in history, people could carry standardized tokens of value, accepted across markets without the need for weighing or testing. This invention simplified trade, encouraged economic growth, and gave the king control over the circulation of wealth. Coins soon spread beyond Lydia, carried by Greek merchants and adopted by their city-states. From this modest beginning, the concept of coinage would spread across the Mediterranean and eventually the entire world. To this day, every coin in our pockets carries the legacy of Lydia's innovation. If Alyats built the foundations of Lydia's prosperity, his son Croesus brought it to dazzling heights. Croesus ascended the throne around 560 BCE, and almost immediately his name became synonymous with wealth. Even in modern languages, the phrase "rich as Croesus" endures, a testament to the legend of his opulence. Croesus's reign was marked by expansion and diplomacy. He extended Lydia's control over the Ionian Greek cities on the Aegean coast, bringing them into his orbit while allowing them a degree of autonomy. He also cultivated alliances with distant powers, sending gifts of gold to the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, to Egyptian pharaohs, and to other rulers of the Mediterranean world. These gestures were not mere charity. They were deliberate acts of diplomacy, using wealth to secure prestige and influence. Under Croesus, Lydia's economy flourished as never before. With coinage now standardized, trade became faster and more reliable. Sardis grew into one of the great commercial centers of the ancient world, its markets filled with textiles, jewelry, and luxury goods. Lydian woolen garments, dyed with rich colors and woven with skill, became highly prized across the Mediterranean. The Pactolus River and nearby mines provided an endless supply of electrum, silver, and gold. With these resources, Croesus introduced a second innovation. He refined coinage further by separating gold from silver, creating the world's first pure gold and silver coins. This refinement increased trust in Lydian money and secured its place as the dominant currency of the region. Beyond wealth, Lydia invested in infrastructure. Roads connected Sardis with the Ionian coast and inland Anatolia, facilitating the flow of goods and ideas. Artisans produced works of exquisite beauty, blending Lydian, Greek, and Eastern styles. Music and poetry thrived at Croesus's court, where artists and philosophers from across the Mediterranean were welcomed. The age of growth made Lydia not just wealthy but influential. By controlling trade routes and introducing coinage, Lydia became a model for neighboring states. The Greeks admired its innovations, and even the Persians, who would one day conquer it, respected its achievements. Croesus himself became a figure of legend. Stories told of his conversations with philosophers like Solon of Athens, who warned him that wealth alone could not guarantee happiness. These tales, whether factual or embellished, reveal how deeply Croesus captured the imagination of the ancient world. To the Greeks, Lydia represented both the splendor and the dangers of great prosperity. With wealth came refinement. Sardis was not only a city of merchants and soldiers but also of artists, musicians, and thinkers. Croesus's patronage encouraged the blending of Greek and Lydian traditions. Temples rose in Sardis, dedicated to gods both native and foreign. The worship of Cybele, the mother goddess, continued alongside the veneration of Apollo and Artemis, showing Lydia's openness to shared spiritual traditions. Festivals filled the city with music and dance. Lydian music, with its distinctive modes, influenced Greek composers, leaving echoes that would ripple through Western musical traditions for centuries. In art, the intricate designs of Lydian jewelry and textiles were admired and imitated by other cultures. By the height of Croesus's reign, Lydia controlled almost all of Western Anatolia. From the Aegean coast to the Halys River, Croesus's authority was recognized. His treasury overflowed with gold, his army was strong, and his alliances extended across the Mediterranean. Sardis became a city where East met West, where Greek philosophers debated with Lydian nobles, and where merchants carried goods from as far away as Babylon and Egypt. This was Lydia's golden moment, a time when its wealth seemed limitless and its influence unstoppable. But history rarely allows kingdoms to rest at their peak. The very prosperity that made Lydia admired also made it a target. Beyond the Halys River, a new power was rising, the Persians, led by Cyrus the Great. And soon, Lydia's age of growth would give way to a time of crisis. The age of growth was Lydia at its brightest, rich in wealth, art, and innovation. Yet no golden age lasts forever. The very openness that had brought Lydia success also exposed it to danger. Foreign powers watched its prosperity with envy, and within its own borders, the challenges of maintaining such abundance began to grow. Every golden age carries within it the seeds of uncertainty. For Lydia, a kingdom that had dazzled the ancient world with its wealth and innovation, the mid-6th century BCE brought both opportunity and peril. At its height under Croesus, Lydia had reached a level of prosperity unrivaled in Anatolia. Yet wealth invites rivalry, and influence often provokes ambition. As the world beyond Sardis shifted, Lydia faced its gravest challenges: war, uncertainty, and the testing of a king's judgment. Croesus's name echoed across the Mediterranean. His court glittered with gold, his alliances extended into Greece and Egypt, and his treasury seemed inexhaustible. But prosperity breeds confidence, and confidence can turn to overreach. The Greeks told a famous story of Croesus's meeting with Solon of Athens, the wise lawgiver. Croesus, eager to be praised, asked Solon who was the happiest man he had ever seen, expecting to hear his own name. Instead, Solon reminded him that no man's fortune could be judged until his final day. Wealth could vanish in an instant, Solon warned, and even the greatest king could be brought low. Whether or not this encounter truly occurred, the tale reveals how the ancient world saw Croesus, not just as a rich monarch, but as a man whose pride might lead him astray. While Lydia enjoyed its prosperity, to the east a new power was rising. In the rugged lands of Persia, Cyrus II, known to history as Cyrus the Great, had begun to unite his people. By the mid-6th century BCE, he had overthrown the Medes and begun a campaign that would soon transform the ancient Near East. Croesus watched these developments closely. Lydia's eastern border touched the Halys River, which separated it from Median territory. With the Medes defeated, the Persians were now Lydia's direct neighbors. Croesus faced a dilemma. Should he stand firm against Cyrus or seek alliance through diplomacy? At first, Croesus chose diplomacy. He maintained ties with Babylon and Egypt, hoping to balance Persian power with alliances elsewhere. He also sent envoys to Greece, ensuring loyalty among the Ionian cities and receiving support from Sparta. Yet, beneath this diplomacy lay unease. Cyrus was ambitious, and Persia was expanding at a pace no kingdom could ignore. Croesus was not content to sit idle. Convinced that Lydia's strength and his alliances would protect him, he considered striking first against the Persians. Before making his decision, he turned to the most trusted source of wisdom in the ancient world, the Oracle of Apollo at Delphi. When Croesus asked whether he should wage war against Cyrus, the oracle famously replied, "If you cross the Halys, you will destroy a great empire." Encouraged, Croesus prepared for war. What he did not realize was the ambiguity of the prophecy. The empire destroyed might not be Persia Ahos, but his own. In 547 BCE, Croesus marched eastward, crossing the Halys River into Persian territory. His armies clashed with Cyrus's forces, and the battles were fierce but indecisive. Winter approached, and in keeping with the custom of ancient kings, Croesus withdrew his troops to Sardis, expecting to regroup and call upon his allies in spring. But Cyrus was no ordinary adversary. Unlike other rulers, he did not respect the rhythm of seasonal warfare. Instead, he pursued Croesus relentlessly, marching his army deep into Lydia before winter ended. The Lydians, unprepared for such a bold move, were caught off guard. In 546 BCE, Cyrus and Croesus met in the decisive Battle of Timbra, fought near Sardis. Despite Croesus's experienced troops, Cyrus employed ingenious tactics, using camels to frighten the Lydian horses and break their cavalry's strength. The battle turned against Croesus, and Lydia's forces were routed. Sardis, once thought impregnable with its mighty citadel, soon fell. Ancient writers claim that a Persian soldier discovered a hidden path up the cliffs, allowing the Persians to storm the city. Whether fact or legend, the result was clear. The wealthiest city in Anatolia was now in Persian hands. The end of Croesus' reign became the subject of countless legends. According to Herodotus, the Persians captured him alive and placed him on a pyre, intending to burn him as punishment. As the flames rose, Croesus remembered Solon's warning, that no man should be called happy until his end. Moved by Croesus's words and perhaps fearing divine retribution, Cyrus spared him. Other accounts claim that Croesus was taken into Cyrus's court as an advisor, living out his days in relative comfort. Whatever the truth, Croesus' fall marked not only the end of his reign but the end of Lydia EOS independence. The crisis of Croesus' downfall was not merely military. For the Lydian people it was a cultural shock. The kingdom that had invented coinage, that had dazzled the world with its riches, now belonged to another empire. Lydia became a satrapy, a province of Persia, its kings replaced by governors loyal to Cyrus. Yet, even under Persian rule, Lydia's legacy endured. Sardis remained an important administrative and commercial center. Its markets continued to bustle, its artisans still produced luxury goods, and its coins, now bearing the mark of Persia, continued to circulate. But the independent spirit of Lydia, the pride of Croesus, was gone. The fall of Lydia carried lessons that echoed across the ancient world. For the Greeks, it was a reminder that no wealth, however vast, could guarantee security. For Persia, it demonstrated the effectiveness of Cyrus's bold and unconventional strategies. And for history, it became a story of hubris and fate, told and retold through generations. The phrase "as rich as Croesus" would live on, not because of his lasting power, but because of his spectacular downfall. His name became a symbol of wealth that could not buy safety, and of a kingdom too prosperous for its own survival. Lydia's crisis was a turning point, the moment when glory gave way to vulnerability. Yet crisis did not mean destruction. Though Lydia no longer ruled itself, its innovations, traditions, and culture continued to influence the world around it. When Lydia fell to Cyrus the Great in 546 BCE, many thought it marked the end of the kingdom's story. Yet history rarely ends with conquest. Instead, Lydia entered a new chapter, one of transformation and adaptation. Under the mighty Persian Empire, Sardis and its people learned to thrive within a vast political system that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the mountains of Central Asia. Far from disappearing, Lydia became one of the most important centers of this new world, modernized through administration, culture, and the unbroken flow of trade. Cyrus, unlike many conquerors before him, was not a destroyer of cities, but an organizer of empires. After seizing Sardis, he integrated Lydia into the Persian system, appointing a satrap or governor to oversee the region. This official was responsible for collecting tribute, maintaining order, and enforcing Persian law while respecting local customs. For the Lydians, this meant that their daily lives continued with surprising continuity. Farmers still tilled their fertile valleys, merchants still traded in Sardis markets, and artisans still produced the textiles and jewelry that had long been admired across the Mediterranean. But above them loomed a new political order, one that linked them to lands far beyond Anatolia. Sardis, once the royal capital of Croesus, became the Persian administrative hub in western Anatolia. Its strategic location at the crossroads of Asia Minor made it an ideal seat of power for the empire's western provinces. One of the most significant innovations of the Persian Empire was the creation of an extensive road network. At the heart of this network was the Royal Road, which ran from Susa in Persia to Sardis in Lydia, a distance of nearly 1,700 miles. This road transformed Lydia. Sardis became the western terminus of one of the greatest communication arteries in the ancient world. Couriers could travel from Sardis to Susa in just 7 days, thanks to a system of relay stations where fresh horses awaited. Messages, goods, and officials moved with unprecedented speed, binding together a vast empire. For Lydia, the Royal Road meant more than military control. It meant economic opportunity. Merchants carried spices from India, textiles from Babylon, and silver from the east, all of which passed through Sardis. In return, Lydian goods, coins, garments, and precious metals spread across the empire. Sardis became a cosmopolitan city where Persians, Greeks, Jews, and Anatolians mingled, exchanging not only goods but ideas. Though Croesus had pioneered gold and silver coinage, it was under Persian rule that the system truly matured. The Persians adopted Lydian practices and introduced their own currency, the daric, a gold coin bearing the image of the Persian king. Yet the influence of Lydia was unmistakable. The very concept of state-issued coinage had been born along the Pactolus River. In Sardis, both Lydian and Persian coins circulated side by side. This dual system reflected Lydia's hybrid identity, no longer an independent kingdom, but still a place where innovation continued. The daric and its silver counterpart, the siglos, became the backbone of Persian economic power, enabling the empire to manage its vast resources efficiently. For the people of Lydia, coinage remained not only a tool of trade but a symbol of continuity. Though their kings were gone, the clink of stamped metal in the markets of Sardis reminded them of their unique contribution to history. The Persian conquest did not erase Lydia's culture. Instead, it enriched it. Persian officials and soldiers brought their customs, languages, and religions, which blended with existing traditions. The worship of the mother goddess Cybele continued, now alongside the veneration of Persian deities like Ahura Mazda. Greek influence also grew stronger, as Ionian cities on the coast interacted closely with Sardis. Sardis itself reflected this cultural blend. Its architecture began to show Persian elements, from columned halls to decorative motifs. Yet, Greek artisans also left their mark, introducing styles that would later influence the classical world. Markets filled with a mixture of goods, Persian carpets, Greek pottery, and Lydian textiles. Music, too, became a bridge between cultures. The distinctive scales of Lydian music, once exported to Greece, now absorbed new influences from the East. In taverns and courts alike, melodies carried echoes of Persia, Anatolia, and Hellas. Under Persian rule, Lydia experienced a level of political stability unknown in Croesus's day. The Persians were pragmatic rulers, allowing subject peoples to maintain their languages, religions, and customs as long as they paid tribute and remained loyal. This relative peace fostered prosperity. Farmers could harvest without fear of invasion, merchants could travel safely under the empire's protection, and artisans could work for a diverse clientele. Sardis grew into a city of wealth once more. Not the independent glory of Croesus, but a prosperity woven into the fabric of a larger empire. Persian governors even relied on local elites, many of them descendants of Lydian nobility, to administer daily affairs. Though the monarchy was gone, the social fabric of Lydia remained largely intact. While Lydia adjusted to Persian rule, the relationship between Persia and the Greeks became increasingly tense. The Ionian cities along the Aegean coast, once under Lydian influence, were now firmly in the Persian sphere. Discontent brewed among them, leading to the famous Ionian Revolt in 499 BCE. Sardis played a dramatic role in this rebellion. Greek forces from Athens and Eretria marched inland and burned parts of Sardis, including its temple of Cybele. The Persians eventually crushed the revolt, But the burning of Sardis became one of the sparks that ignited the long conflict between Greece and Persia, from Marathon to Thermopylae. For Lydia, this meant once again being at the center of world events, not as an independent power, but as a vital stage upon which empires clashed. Sardis' wealth, location, and symbolism ensured it remained important, whether as ally, victim, or prize. By the 5th century BCE, Lydia had been fully woven into the Persian Empire. It was no longer the proud kingdom of Croesus, yet it was far from forgotten. Its innovations lived on in every Persian coin, in every caravan that passed along the royal road, and in the hybrid culture that flourished in Sardis. Modernization, for Lydia, meant adaptation. The kingdom had lost its independence, but gained a new role, that of a bridge between East and West. Its roads carried not only goods, but knowledge. Its markets hummed with languages from across the empire, and its people learned that survival in a vast system required resilience as much as pride. The era of modernization gave Lydia a second life under Persian rule. It was no longer a kingdom of kings, but a province of empire, a place where cultures met, trade thrived, and history unfolded. Yet Lydia's story was not finished. Its role in the great dramas of the classical world was only beginning. Though Lydia vanished as an independent kingdom in the mid-6th century BCE, its legacy did not fade. Instead, Lydia became a thread woven into the fabric of world history, shaping the development of politics, economics, and culture far beyond its small corner of Anatolia. What began as a prosperous kingdom beside the Pactolus River grew into a legacy that touched Greece, Persia, Rome, and eventually the entire globe. The most enduring contribution of Lydia was, without question, the invention of coinage. What Croesus and his predecessors pioneered, small pieces of stamped metal guaranteeing value, transformed the way humans conducted trade. Before Lydia, transactions relied on barter or weighed metals. After Lydia, coins became the language of commerce. They allowed markets to flourish, taxes to be standardized, and armies to be paid reliably. With coinage, states could centralize power in ways never before possible. Greek city-states quickly adopted coins, placing images of gods, heroes, and symbols on their currency. The Persians carried the idea across their vast empire through the gold daric. Later, the Romans would refine coinage into a system that endured for centuries. Every time a coin changed hands in the ancient world, it carried with it a spark of Lydian genius. Today, though currencies have shifted from metal to paper to digital numbers, the principle remains the same. From every dollar and euro to the smallest coin in circulation, the lineage leads back to Lydia's rivers of gold. Geography gave Lydia a role larger than its size. Nestled in western Anatolia, it stood at the crossroads of Asia and Europe. Sardis connected the great empires of the East with the bustling cities of the Aegean. Under the Persians, Sardis became the terminus of the royal road, enabling the swift movement of goods, troops, and messages across continents. This position made Lydia more than a province. It was the gateway through which cultures met. Greek merchants brought pottery, wine, and art. Eastern caravans carried spices, textiles, and metals. Ideas traveled just as easily. Philosophies, religious practices, and artistic styles blended in Sardis's markets and taverns. Lydia thus played a quiet but crucial role in shaping the cultural exchange that defined the classical world. Lydia's relationship with the Greeks was complex, sometimes adversarial, sometimes cooperative. Yet Lydia's influence on Greek culture was profound. Greek writers preserved many stories about Croesus. To them, he was both a warning and a fascination, a king of dazzling wealth whose downfall revealed the fragility of human fortune. The tale of his conversation with Solon, whether historical or myth, became a moral lesson repeated for centuries. Wealth cannot guarantee happiness, and no man should be called fortunate until his end. Beyond stories, Lydia influenced Greek music and fashion. The Lydian mode, a musical scale associated with emotional expressiveness, became part of Greek theory. Greek poets and musicians acknowledged their debt to Lydian styles, while garments woven in Lydia's workshops adorned Greek elites. In this way, Lydia lived on in Greek culture, not merely as a conquered neighbor, but as a contributor to the richness of Hellenic life. As part of the Persian Empire, Lydia was deeply embedded in one of history's most powerful systems. Persian coinage, administration, and communication networks all carried Lydian influence. Sardis served as a Persian capital in the west, ensuring the city remained significant even after Croesus was gone. Centuries later, when Alexander the Great swept through Anatolia, Sardis opened its gates to him without resistance. The city then became part of the Hellenistic world, blending Greek and Anatolian traditions. Under the Romans, Sardis remained a vibrant provincial city, rebuilt after devastating earthquakes and continuing to serve as a hub of commerce and culture. Thus, Lydia's story did not end with conquest. It became interwoven into the great empires that followed. Its wealth and innovations became tools in the hands of others, but the imprint of its origins was never erased. One of Lydia's most important roles in world history was symbolic. The story of Croesus became a parable of hubris, the danger of pride and overconfidence. For centuries, writers from Herodotus to later philosophers used Croesus as an example. He had everything: gold, armies, alliances, yet lost it all through a single miscalculation. His consultation with the Oracle of Delphi, with its famously ambiguous prophecy, became a tale of how humans misinterpret fate. This narrative shaped not only Greek thought but also later European literature and philosophy. Croesus was cited in medieval sermons, Renaissance plays, and Enlightenment essays. His story transcended time, becoming part of humanity's shared reflection on wealth, power, and humility. Lydia's cultural impact was subtle but lasting. Its textiles, especially finely woven garments dyed in rich colors, were admired across the Mediterranean. Its music, as mentioned, influenced Greek traditions. Its worship of Cybele, the mother goddess, contributed to the spread of Anatolian religious practices that later merged into Greek and Roman cults. Even architecture bore traces of Lydian influence. Though little survives, description suggests that Lydia's blending of local and foreign elements laid groundwork for later Anatolian styles. When historians look back at ancient civilizations, some stand out for their empires, others for their philosophies, and still others for their art. Lydia, though often overshadowed, matters because it introduced something so fundamental that we scarcely think about it today: the very concept of money as we know it. Its role as a cultural bridge, its cautionary tale of Croesus, and its position within the Persian and Roman worlds make it far more than a forgotten kingdom. Lydia is a reminder that even small nations can change the course of human history, not through conquest, but through innovation. As Lydia's role in world history became clear, so too did its enduring importance. It had given the world coinage, shaped Greek culture, and served as a crossroads of civilizations. Yet its greatest contribution was not material, but symbolic: the legacy of wealth and the question of what truly endures when riches fade. The story of Lydia began on the banks of the Pactolus River, where flecks of gold shimmered in the current and inspired a kingdom unlike any other. It rose to glory under kings who turned natural wealth into human invention, and it fell when pride met power greater than itself. Yet Lydia's story did not end with Croesus, nor with Persia, nor even with Rome. Its legacy endured, etched into history, woven into culture, and carried in the coins that still clink in our hands today. For centuries after its fall, Lydia lived on in legend. Writers from Herodotus to later chroniclers retold the tale of Croesus, the Golden King. His name became shorthand for unimaginable riches, invoked whenever wealth was admired or envied. In medieval Europe, preachers used Croesus as an example of vanity and divine justice. In Renaissance art and drama, he appeared as a figure of tragic pride. Even in modern times, the phrase "as rich as Croesus" continues to echo, a reminder that the memory of Lydia is inseparable from the idea of wealth itself. But Lydia's riches were more than a symbol. They were practical, transformative. By inventing coinage, Lydia gave the world a tool that reshaped economies, societies, and governments. That invention remains one of the most profound legacies any civilization has left behind. The ruins of Sardis still stand as a testament to Lydia's endurance. Nestled in the fertile Hermus Valley, the site has revealed treasures of history through decades of excavation. Archaeologists have uncovered the grand gymnasium complex from the Roman period, the remains of the famous Temple of Artemis, and the sturdy fortifications that once guarded the citadel. Most striking of all are the remnants of Lydian craftsmanship, jewelry of intricate design, pottery bearing distinctive motifs, and even the early electrum coins that changed the course of trade. Walking through Sardis today, one can almost hear the hum of its markets and imagine the glitter of gold in its streets. These ruins remind us that Lydia was more than its fall. It was a place of builders, artisans, and innovators who contributed to human civilization in ways far beyond their own lifetimes. The legend of Croesus endures not simply because he was wealthy, but because of what his story teaches. His downfall illustrates timeless truths. Wealth is fleeting. No matter how vast, riches can vanish through war, miscalculation, or fate. Pride can blind. Croesus believed his fortune and alliances made him invincible, but he misread the signs of change. Wisdom outlasts gold. The story of Solon reminding Croesus that true happiness cannot be measured until life's end carries as much weight now as it did 2,500 years ago. These lessons resonate across ages, reminding us that the pursuit of wealth must be balanced with humility, foresight, and perspective. Though Lydia was not as vast as Persia, as philosophical as Greece, or as enduring as Rome, its influence was disproportionate to its size. In many ways, Lydia represents the power of innovation. A single idea, coinage, changed the way humans organize their economies, their governments, and even their personal lives. It also represents the fragility of kingdoms. Lydia's fall was swift, its independence gone within a single generation. Yet its culture did not disappear. It adapted, blended, and influenced others. This is the paradox of history. Kingdoms may fall, but their ideas can live forever. Today, Lydia survives not as a living nation, but as a memory preserved through history, archaeology, and language. The name of Croesus remains a proverb. The coins of Lydia lie in museums as the ancestors of all modern money. The city of Sardis continues to attract scholars, travelers, and dreamers who seek to understand how such a small kingdom could leave such a large imprint. In a world where economies now revolve around invisible digital currencies and global trade networks, Lydia's story is still relevant. It reminds us of the origins of money, of the human need to create trust in exchange, and of the dangers of placing too much faith in wealth alone. As humanity faces its own crises, economic, political, and environmental, the lessons of Lydia whisper across the centuries. Innovation can uplift, but pride can destroy. Lydia's legacy is not one of empire or conquest, but of transformation. It stands as the birthplace of money, the home of Croesus's legend, and the bridge between East and West. Its story weaves together themes of ambition, prosperity, fragility, and endurance. Perhaps Lydia was, as some have called it, the kingdom too wealthy to be loved. Yet even if envy and rivalry hastened its downfall, its contributions became part of the shared heritage of humanity. Every time a coin changes hands, every time wealth is measured, the shadow of Lydia lingers. From the glittering banks of the Pactolus to the ruins of Sardis, Lydia's journey reminds us that greatness is not measured only by how long a kingdom lasts, but by what it leaves behind. Croesus is long gone, his palaces silent, his treasures scattered. But Lydia's invention endures, its memory preserved in story and stone. The kingdom that seemed too wealthy for its own survival gave the world a gift of incalculable value, the means by which human societies organize, grow, and dream of prosperity. Lydia may have vanished from the map, but in truth it never left us.